I was arranging a small vase of fresh daisies in the guest bedroom when my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a casual reminder about cruise details, maybe a packing list or a cheerful emoji. Instead, I saw the words that split my chest open. "You're uninvited. Ashley doesn't want to babysit an old lady." For a moment, I couldn't even process it. The phone slid from my hand and hit the hardwood, the crack of glass echoing like a gunshot. I just stood there, staring at those words, unable to breathe. My son, my only child, had sent me that message as casually as if he were canceling a dentist appointment. I looked around the room where I had been fussing over details just minutes before. My suitcase was already packed downstairs. Neatly folded cruise dresses, swimsuits I hadn't dared wear in years, sandals with little rhinestones. I had even bought a sun hat, wide-brimmed and silly, because I imagined myself strolling the deck at sunset, laughing with my son and his wife, maybe finally feeling like part of their world. I had spent weeks preparing new outfits, my first passport, even a pedicure, the first in decades. I'd arranged for my neighbor to water the garden, for the mail to be held at the post office. Every step had been filled with anticipation, like I was a little girl again, waiting for Christmas morning. All that hope, all that planning, and it ended with one message that made me feel disposable. I thought about the cruise brochure still pinned to the fridge, the turquoise waters, palm trees swaying, promises of laughter and adventure. I had touched that glossy paper every morning while pouring my coffee, whispering to myself, "This is going to be the trip where we finally grow closer." And now, all I could see was rejection written in digital ink. My hands weren't trembling anymore. The tears that should have come stayed locked behind something harder, colder. I had given 30 years of my life raising that boy after his father died, believing it was always us against the world. And yet here I stood, with daisies scattered across the floor, realizing that perhaps it had only ever been me. As the silence settled around me, something inside shifted. Beneath the heartbreak, beneath the humiliation, a flicker of clarity lit up. For the first time in years, I felt a small current of strength rising through the ache. If he wanted me to see myself as a burden, he was about to learn that I carried more power than he ever imagined. And that thought led me back to the years of sacrifice, the long nights, the promises I made to a 12-year-old boy who had just lost his father. When I think back, it still amazes me how quickly 30 years can blur into a collection of quiet sacrifices. I was only in my 30s when my husband passed away. One day, I was a wife. The next, I was a widow. Standing in the doorway of a half-finished life with a 12-year-old boy clinging to me like I was the only safe harbor left. And in truth, I was. Those early years were built on long nights and small victories. I packed school lunches with food I sometimes skipped myself. I worked extra shifts, washed clothes until my hands ached, and sat at the kitchen table helping with school projects when my body wanted nothing more than sleep. Every sacrifice felt worth it because I believed I was building something lasting: security, love, and a bond with my son that nothing could break. I remember his laughter on the swing set in the backyard, his sneakers scuffing the dirt as he dreamed out loud about becoming an architect. He'd lean back, hair flying, promising me he'd build me a house one day so I would never have to worry again. Those words were stitched into my heart, carrying me through years of exhaustion and loneliness. When he married, I hoped those dreams would expand to include me, not erase me. His wife was always polite but distant, and I told myself time would soften her edges. I imagined that cruise as a turning point, the chance to share long dinners, swap stories, maybe even hear her laugh with me instead of at me. I had let myself believe that I could move from the margins into the circle of family again. But instead of closeness, I was handed a message that reduced me to an afterthought, a burden, an inconvenience. My son, the boy who once told me I was his world, had decided I no longer fit in his. The sting of that reality still presses against my chest, heavier than grief. And yet, as bitter as it felt, another truth began to rise in me. I had given everything, and I had been underestimated. If they thought I had nothing left, they were about to learn how wrong they were. As the shock of that message faded into a colder quiet, I found myself walking through the house they believed was theirs. Every room carried my fingerprints, curtains I had chosen, furniture I had paid for, even the oak table I refinished with my own hands. They had decorated, yes, but beneath the paint and polish, this was my house. It always had been. When my son married, I wanted to give them a strong start, a sense of security. So I presented the house as a gift, letting them believe it was fully theirs. But behind the generosity was foresight. The deed had never left my name. It was structured as conditional, written carefully with the help of an attorney years ago. I had built safety into that gift, a safeguard in case I was ever treated as disposable. I pulled open the drawer in my kitchen where the documents rested, waiting like silent witnesses. My fingers smoothed over the thick paper, the ink still crisp, my name standing firm on every line. For years, I had let them live under the illusion of ownership, believing it would nurture peace. Instead, it had only fueled entitlement. In that moment, something inside me straightened. I was no longer the grieving mother begging for scraps of affection. I was the woman who had worked double shifts to buy this house. The woman who had raised a child alone. The woman who had thought 3 steps ahead when no one else believed she could. I made an appointment with my attorney that very afternoon. I sat across from her in the same office where we had drafted those documents years ago, and I asked her to prepare everything for transfer and sale. My voice was calm, steady, carrying none of the hurt that had weighed me down for so long. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge is fueled by rage, by a desire to hurt. What I felt was sharper, cleaner. These were consequences. My son had chosen to reduce me to an old woman who didn't matter. My daughter-in-law had chosen to see me as an inconvenience. Now they would live with the outcome of those choices. As I left the office with the papers tucked under my arm, I felt lighter. The sorrow was still there, but it no longer ruled me. In its place was a quiet determination, the kind that had carried me through widowhood and single motherhood. They thought they had the upper hand. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The calls started almost immediately. At first, they came every couple of hours, then every few minutes, one after another, lighting up my phone with their names. My son's voice filled my voicemail with panic, confusion, demands for explanation. His wife's number flashed again and again, though she had never once spoken directly to me without his prompting. The urgency in their messages was sharp, frantic. I listened to none of them. Not one. Instead, I let the phone rest on the kitchen counter while I folded clothes into a suitcase. This time, the suitcase wasn't for a family trip I had been pushed out of. It was for me my journey, my freedom, dresses that made me feel confident, sturdy shoes for walking through new cities, a few books I had always promised myself I'd finally finish. Each item I packed felt like a declaration my life is my own again. As the for sale sign went up across town, I sat at my own kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the sun climb the sky. I felt no need to rush, no need to answer to anyone. For the first time in decades, the silence in my home was not loneliness, it was peace. I thought of the woman I had been for so long, always mom first, always shrinking myself to fit their expectations, always grateful for scraps of inclusion. That woman had withered under the weight of constant accommodation. And now, as I zipped my suitcase and set it by the door, I realized she no longer lived here. Of course, there was a pang, a bittersweet ache in letting go of the role I had clung to for so many years. Motherhood had been my compass, the reason I endured nights of exhaustion and years of sacrifice. To loosen my grip on that identity felt like stepping into unfamiliar air. But the ache did not undo me. It reminded me that love had been real, even if gratitude had not followed. Their panic and desperation could not touch me anymore. My decision was made. I wasn't punishing them. I was choosing myself. And in that quiet act, I found a strength I hadn't felt in decades. What I didn't know then was that beneath their frantic calls and whispered arguments, another truth was waiting to surface, a truth far darker than I could have imagined. I had just begun to breathe again. The first leg of my new journey had taken me north, to a small inn tucked between autumn hills. The mornings were cool, the kind that made you wrap your hands around a warm cup of coffee and linger by the window. For the first time in years, I was waking up without the weight of expectation pressing against my chest. Then one morning, a letter forwarded from home caught up with me. It came in a plain envelope. Yet the moment I saw my attorney's name printed on the corner, my stomach tightened. I opened it slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. Inside was a message that made my heart stumble. My son had filed a lawsuit against me. Not only that, but attached were documents from his wife, divorce papers, filled with accusations I could hardly believe. The words blurred as I tried to take them in. Gambling debts, hidden bank accounts, credit cards run to their limits, tens of thousands owed to names I didn't recognize. It was as if the boy I had raised, the boy who once swung high on the backyard set and promised me he'd build me a house, had been living a double life right under my nose. Suddenly, his cruel text message took on a darker shade. It hadn't been casual cruelty alone. It had been desperation, the act of a man drowning in secrets and shame, trying to push away the one person who might see through the cracks. I remembered how easily he had typed those words, how quick he was to erase me from his vacation plans. Now I saw the truth. I had been uninvited, not because I was a burden, but because my presence might have exposed the lies he had been spinning. The irony cut deep. I had thought I was reclaiming my dignity by selling the house, drawing a line after years of being dismissed. In reality, that decision had saved me. If I had left that home in his hands, it might have disappeared into a pit of debts I never knew existed. What I had done out of self-respect had accidentally protected both of us from financial ruin. And yet, the betrayal pierced me. I had sacrificed everything to give him stability, to build him a life without fear. I had believed in his promises, in his dreams, in his goodness. Now I saw the shadow side, the weakness he had tried to bury beneath a polished exterior. His wife's distance, the tight smile at family gatherings, it all made sense now. She had been living alongside a man she couldn't fully trust. I sat by that inn window for a long time, the papers spread out before me, the golden leaves drifting past the glass. The satisfaction I had once felt in taking control was replaced by something heavier. My son wasn't just unkind, he was unraveling, and whether I wanted to or not, his collapse was about to pull me deeper into a storm I had never anticipated. What I didn't know yet was that the storm stretched far beyond debts and divorce. It would soon pull in forces far more dangerous, forces that carried badges, laws, and shadows darker than any family conflict. I thought I had reached the peak of shock with the divorce papers and the gambling debts. But life has a way of reminding you that storms can always grow darker. A few days after reading those documents, my attorney called with a voice tighter than usual. She asked me to come into her office immediately, and when I arrived, there was someone else waiting, a woman in a dark suit, with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through me. She introduced herself as an agent with the FBI. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. I had expected legal battles, maybe ugly family disputes, but nothing could have prepared me for the word she used: organized crime. My son's gambling hadn't been harmless online poker games or friendly wagers. He had stumbled into something far more sinister, a network that used debt as a leash, pulling men like him into dangerous tasks. I sat in that conference room, clutching the arms of the chair as the agent laid it out. Bradley's debts weren't just about money, they were hooks. These people didn't want repayment alone. They wanted compliance. They had been grooming him to launder funds, to become another cog in their machine. Paying them off wouldn't free him. It would only chain him tighter. My mind raced. I thought of the frantic voicemails, his trembling voice, the way his wife's patience had finally snapped. All of it traced back to this, the suffocating grip of criminals who thrived on desperation. The same son who once ran barefoot through sprinklers in our backyard was now teetering on the edge of a life that could swallow him whole. Fear rose like a tide inside me. These weren't abstract dangers. The agent showed me photos of others who had been caught in similar webs, ordinary professionals who ended up facing prison sentences or worse. Some had been threatened. Some had disappeared altogether. For the first time, I truly understood the danger my son had dragged not only himself into, but also those around him. And yet, as the fear tightened in my chest, something steadier began to anchor me. I had spent decades surviving loss, hardship, and loneliness. I had carried both myself and my son through storms before. Now, I faced a different kind of storm, one I could not fight with love or money, but with clarity and courage. The agent asked if I would help. Bradley's cooperation was essential, but he was terrified. They needed me to steady him, to remind him that facing consequences with dignity was better than being consumed by criminals. The thought of my son wired, sitting across from dangerous men while agents listened in from a distance, made my stomach churn. But I also knew that turning away would be worse. I nodded. My voice didn't shake when I said I would support him, but only in the right way. I would not bail him out, not hand over the money he demanded, not enable the cycle that had already cost so much. I would stand beside him, yes, but on the path of truth, even if it was paved with fear. That night, alone in my small, rented room, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, this was no longer just a family story. This was survival. and it demanded every ounce of strength I had left. The sting operation unfolded with the precision of a clock winding down to its final tick. I sat in a surveillance van, headphones pressed to my ears, my heart pounding as my son walked toward a dark sedan carrying a briefcase that was never meant to pay off debts, but to bait predators. Every step he took felt like a lifetime. I wanted to reach out, to pull him back, but I stayed still. This was his moment to face the truth. When the voices from the car spoke, their words dripped with menace. They weren't just after money. They wanted control, obedience, another pawn to play in their dangerous game. For a moment, I thought my son might falter, might collapse under the weight of fear. But then I heard his voice steady, rehearsed, brave in its own trembling way. And seconds later, I saw the swarm of agents descend. Shouts, handcuffs, flashing lights. It was over. Relief washed over me like a wave, but it wasn't the wild, jubilant kind. It was quieter, heavier, filled with the understanding that nothing would ever return to the way it had been. My son had been spared the worst, but not without scars. His cooperation earned him probation and mandatory counseling instead of prison. But his marriage, his pride, his carefully built image, all of that lay in ruins. And me, I realized I was no longer the mother who had sacrificed every piece of herself just to keep him afloat. I had stepped back, and in doing so, I had found myself again. It was bittersweet, watching him stumble, but I knew in my bones it was the only way he would ever learn to walk without leaning on me. As for my own path, I chose not to return to the life of waiting by the phone, hoping for scraps of inclusion. I booked a small cottage overseas, a place my late husband had always dreamed of visiting. I wanted mornings filled with quiet reading, evenings with new friends, perhaps even the courage to open my heart again. For the first time in decades, the horizon was mine to chase, not someone else's shadow to follow. What I learned through all of this is simple. Though it came at a great cost, love without boundaries is not love, it is surrender. I had surrendered too much, too long, and in reclaiming myself, I not only saved my own life, but perhaps gave my son the chance to save his. Consequences are not cruelty. They are the most honest form of love we can offer. So, if you've ever been told you are a burden, or if you felt small in someone else's story, I hope my journey reminds you that you are allowed to write your own chapter. You are allowed to demand respect, to hold firm, to step into your own light. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary that changed everything? Share your story in the comments, I promise. Someone who needs courage will read it and feel less alone.